Take a bow. The head of the Huang family is young and handsome, and he never ages. All Elvadors born must prove their worth to the head of the family. If you fail to do so, you are the losers and become fodder for the tree. The man sitting in the middle of this mess asked where his fiancée Gloriosa Elvador was. Oh yes, back in the old days that she doesn't remember much about. Her name was Gloriosa. The Huang clan are flower people who grow special flowers, an isolated and powerful family with a proud history of thousands of years. And today, the Elvador family will be destroyed because of her, after she was sacrificed to the divine tree. She gradually assimilated with it, but at the same time, used that power, pretending to provide the information her family wanted, but in reality she was hiding a secret code inside, for she would bring the man who would overthrow Elvador. But that man is her fiancé, Duke Arvel Yultesia. How could such a coincidence happen? Now the Duke was asking Magnus where he hid Gloriosa, and if he didn't answer him this time, he would cut off his tongue. Gloriosa laughed at her older brother Magnus, but only wished she could see his miserable face in person. When he became enslaved to someone he ignored just because he was a child, because she couldn't stay here anymore. Now she heard footsteps, and if she still had her heart, it would be beating very hard. That's why the Duke couldn't find her. He always thought it was suspicious, and wondered why, in terms of Elvador, he felt like he was being taken somewhere rather than killed. But it turned out that Gloriosa had asked him to find the divine tree, or rather, to find her hidden in it. But in any case, thanks to her, the Duke was having fun. The whole rivalry with Gloriosa was the only incentive in his cursed life, and now he was asking her what he had to do. Gloriosa hoped that those people would suffer as much as she did, asked him to cut down that tree and burn it so that there would be no trace of it left. Arweth agreed to do what she wanted, but when Magnus tried to stop him, he promised that they would all suffer in the hell he had created for eternity. If he cut down the tree, Gloriosa's soul would be released, but the Duke would be damned, and it was very romantic to receive the curse for the sake of his bride. But since he already had 3 curses, he didn't care if he got another one, so he started to unite her with the tree. Even though it hurt her, she didn't want to be a tree for the rest of her life. When he did it, she thanked him, because she realized that if she had lived together with him, then everything would have been different, and maybe they would have been very happy in some future that she didn't have, but that could have been hers. When she woke up at the same moment, she heard music and realized that it must be a dream. But her hands were moving like a human's, and Magnus was alive next to her. She didn't realize what it was that she was feeling, déjà vu, as if this was the last spring banquet she had attended as a human. Did she see moments from her life before she died? She had many other memories, but for some reason this day came to mind. When Magnus grabbed her hand, she felt pain and didn't understand why if it was just herself. If this wasn't a dream, if this was a real day from the past, then Magnus would say the words that were running through her head, that she was so ugly that she couldn't even blossom a single petal, and that she would be the fodder for the tree. When he said this phrase, he was not wrong in one word. It was exactly as he said it. So Gloriosa thought that she was dead, because it could not be in reality. She remembered her last breath in Arvid's arms, but she had destroyed that unbearable family and sent Magnus to hell. Would she have to go through all that again? Couldn't even dying free her from it, she wondered why. But then she started laughing hysterically and loudly, because she realized that all the information she had seen and heard when she was a sacred tree was now in her head, and all the things Elvador would do in the future and how their situation would develop. If it was a gift from Arvid, he was the greatest mage in history, so he could probably turn back time and thanked him for saving her in her past life. But in this life, she would save herself and was going to meet him. Elvador of the Huang family had special powers. Namely, on their little fingers, flowers bloomed as they developed their powers. A mark appeared on the nail, and each flower had a unique power. And only after all the flowers bloomed, they were recognized as members of the family, so the children made every effort to make them bloom. Usually they bloom by the age of 12, but Gloriosa had barely begun to bloom at the age of 14. Even so, she had no special powers. Of all the 37 children of the previous head of the family, she was the most useless and was eventually thrown into the fodder for the tree. She was just beginning to realize that this was real, and she was indeed human again, and her abilities had also returned to their original state. Immediately, a bud bloomed beside her, and she was surprised that she had not only her memories, but also her abilities. However, the power of her flower is the flower flame, which can't burn anything, and it only looks luxurious, but is actually useless. But suddenly, she heard a knock on the door followed by a maid. Gloriosa realized that she had to hide her flower and had to hide her powers for a while. Noma is her nanny and maid and spy who reports her every move to Magnus. That's why Gloriosa decided to start with her. When the maid ordered her to sit down at the lyre to practice, the girl refused and said one more crazy thing, that from now on, Noma was fired. The maid looked at her and realized that the girl had gone mad, and they could not dismiss her because it sounded unbelievable. But when the girl said that she knew that the woman was stealing women's jewelry, and she should not have thought of running away, Gloriosa knew very well that the jewelry was under that bed, and in those moments when the girl needed it, the maid could cover her. Noma tried to explain that it was a slander, so Gloriosa wondered if she had stolen the jewelry or if she just wanted to frame her mistress. The numerous children in the house kept their distance from each other for fear, and as Gloriosa was the most useless of all, they despised her. No one went into her room except Gnome. Only after she became a sacred tree did she learn that she had hidden these stolen jewels in her room. However, even if the truth came out, now no one would doubt her. The girl was forbidden to go near the other mistresses, but with Noma it was different. She would die. And even more foolishly in the past, Gloriosa had really tried to make Noma love her. But she was always indifferent. However, she was the only person near her, but now she would not do such a stupid thing. So now she said she was going to go to the first mistress and tell her that someone was stealing the jewels and that Noma had 4 accomplices, and she did not know which of the 4 would confess first, for it was the maid who was in charge. Servants who have been working in Elvador for a long time must be smart, because in order to survive, you need to distinguish between what you can touch and what you should avoid. Noma looked carefully at the girl and did not understand what had happened to her, for she was no longer looking at her with dead eyes, but with eyes radiating bright vitality, as if she had become a different person overnight. Waiting for the maid's answer, Gloriosa thought that she had always been clever and it was time to choose. So when Noma asked if she would do something for her, the girl was glad, because she was still as clever as ever. So she told her to go to the maids and told them to come to her one by one secretly, and she had to beware of the ogre, for there was no guarantee that Magnus alone could make it bloom again. After 3 days, Gloriosa thought that since she was Magnus's only sister, Noma must have thought that she too could raise an ogre. Of course, the girl suspected that she would want to run away with all the jewelry, because the woman was capable of that. But in the end, everything worked out well, because now there were fewer eyes watching her. She also managed to attract a few more maids thanks to the information she got when she was a sacred tree. But the real problem is this: a useless flower without the heat of fire because her flowers can't burn anything, but only leave soot, was the main reason why she was chosen as food for the sacred tree. And she didn't know if her abilities had changed since her return. She didn't know the details, but it was obvious that the regression had taken its toll on her body. Her body ached from the high fever. But then she thought of Arvid, who had found her and saved her, realizing that now was not the time to lie down, but to eat something to cheer herself up. But when she got out of bed and looked at her plate, she saw a note that said that a guest from the duchy was coming, which was not bad enough for the maids who had found it out for her. Today was the only day of the year that Elvador opened its doors and welcomed guests, for the spring banquet would begin the day Arvid would arrive. The Elvador Spring Banquet is the only day Elvador opens its doors. Also on this day, all 4 duchies from the Empire are invited. The family of the North and the liaison of Gaios, the Elvador Flower Clan of the East, the Anassa family of summoners in the West, and the Star Clan of the South of Yultesia. The first emperor gifted each duchy, and only the head of the family and their receivers knew what these divine items were hidden. The Elvador Wisdom Tree was one of these items. And Arvid would destroy all divine gifts in the future, including this tree. And Gloriosa realized that if the boy was going to do it in his youth, she could be of use to him. Because she knew the essence and location of all the divine items, she needed a little bit of hustle to talk to him, since this would be her first game. And Gloriosa had had enough of being a sacred tree. The only question was whether her half-brothers were still between the dumb ones and going in. She looked around wondering who she should start with. As soon as she was spotted, she was bombarded with insults and accusations from all sides. One of the guys even threw food at her in an attempt to get her out of there. It was Bert, the only son of the first wife, who got the best grades, but after Magnus took over as head, he became a nobody. Sooner or later, Bert would die at the hands of Magnus. And knowing the future, Gloriosa saw how worthless he was. And now she sympathized with all the spectators of the performance she was about to put on. So she thanked Bert for throwing the rest at her, saying that thanks to her brother she would be well fed, asking if she should give anything in return for such generosity. Bert was astonished, not knowing what was going on or what her expression was, for he thought she would grovel as usual, but the girl only smiled oddly. Then the maid standing near Bert raised 2 buckets of soup and poured it right on the boy, who had not expected anything like that, and all those watching did not understand what was going on. Bert came to his senses and threatened the maids that they would pay for it, and he would punish them personally. But one of the girls answered that he could not do it, because first he had to get permission from the head of the family. But in that case, his words could be seen as a challenge to the authority of the head of the family. But Gloriosa said that if Bert continued to behave like that, she would have no choice but to tell the head of the family. Bert tried to threaten her, saying that she would be flogged, but Gloriosa only smiled, because whatever he did would be useless, since now all the maids were in her hands. She knew everything about everyone who ate and slept in Elvador, their family, their desires. So it was not so difficult to make them her puppets, because it was only necessary to use the carrot and the stick correctly. Then she asked why the guy was angry, because he got the first place undeservedly, because he knew all the answers in advance, and because of this, Isla was only second in the ranking all the time. Bert angrily began to ask how she knew it, and everyone realized that it was true, because he did not deny it. He was just curious. And then Isla, who suspected that there was something wrong. Then the girl realized that it was time to start the second stage of her game, and cheerfully headed for the window, saying that they would all have to be stuck there for a while. She warned them beforehand not to even think about running away, because it was impossible, as all the doors leading outside were locked by the maids, and it was better to avoid the windows if they didn't want to burn alive. Then, jumping out the window, the girl realized that her body had not fully recovered yet, and she was locked up for a while, so there was not much time. If they didn't show up, someone would be here soon, so she had to hurry and headed towards the banquet. When she reached a certain point, she knew she had to crawl from there and hoped it wasn't too late, but suddenly her nose was bleeding. For Gloriosa, it was no surprise because she had already assumed she was overworked. But this was the first time she had used her ability, so it made sense that it would be a blow to her body. Besides, her stamina was originally quite weak, and then her mind went back to when she had fallen down as a child, and when her mother had noticed it, she had gently picked her up in her arms, feeling sorry for her. It was then that she asked her to remember that Elvadorian-borns get stronger the harder they hit, but if something happened to her that was hard for her to bear, she had to find her fiancé. Her fiancé is the son of her mom's most precious and special friend, and together with him, they will surely be able to overcome everything. Soon after her mom told her that, she suddenly left this world as if she had foreseen her own death. And now, just as her mom had told her, she was as strong as her past life had been torturous and was sure to meet her fiancé. As she crawled toward the small group of people, she saw the shiny silver hair, and though she could only see his back, she could tell by his voice who it was, for it was Arvid. She was so glad she'd found him faster than she'd imagined, but she hadn't thought about how to approach him. Now Arvid was telling a lady that her son had distinguished himself at the hunt, for he had heard how he had amused the audience by shooting an arrow several times in the wrong place. The woman looked at him tensely and said that her son had a mild temperament, so he would have been able to shoot an unfortunate animal, and thought that the guy didn't know her son well enough. Arvid apologized if he had offended her, but thought she would also enjoy the story of her son, since she was so animated in telling the story of the young lady whom she had not even seen. The woman was outraged. Why should she listen to his insults? She had never met the young lady, but the information about her was true. Besides, the incapable younger sister of the head of the family was not even seen at the banquet. Gloriosa realized that it was about her, and if Arvid stood up for her, then he knew she was his fiancée too. The woman with whom Arvid had finished talking went to complain to her husband. Why he went towards Arvid to teach him a lesson, Gloriosa already realized that if he interfered, it would only complicate things. So, with the help of her abilities, she created several colors, thanks to which everything in the area started to burn, including the girls' dresses and tables. Gloriosa rushed into the forest, realizing that the guy shouldn't have gone far in trying to find him there. But suddenly she met Magnus's escorts on her way, realizing that if they approached her, everything was lost. She didn't know what to do, because she didn't want to get to him that way. But suddenly the guards heard a strange sound somewhere off to the side, as if something was moving, going that way. The girl stood there in a panic, realizing that if she was caught here now, all her plans would come to an end, but she had nowhere to run. At the moment when the guards came to the tree behind which she was standing, she was no longer there, because she survived only thanks to the tree. But at that moment, she could not think that she was under it. At the same moment, she began to hear the voice of the trees on all sides, telling her that they would always help her. And she realized that the divine tree is the being that controls all the plants in the world, and she still has the power of the divine tree. The flower's abilities are minor, but they will be useful, so she asked the tree to help her move to another tree because there was someone she must meet. She felt very happy that she had no fear of heights, but she realized that she had completely missed Arvid while she was hiding from the guards, and it would be hard to find him alone in this huge forest. In that case, she would just make the guy himself come. Using his powers, and burning flowers would appear around her. If you look at the course of his past life, Arvid probably went into the forest to find the divine tree. If he sees that top color, he will definitely come there. Suddenly there was a strong wind, which caused the girl to fall down when she saw Arvid catching her, who thought it was just a small squirrel. The boy asked her why she had climbed up the tree, for he could have taken her for a hired assassin, and she could have died by his hand. So she asked him to be careful. The boy looked at the tree and asked her if she had blossomed the flowers, to which the girl was surprised because she couldn't see anything because of the blindfold, and told him that the flower was called Gloriosa, and her name is Gloriosa too, after which she mentally prayed to him to say that he knew her, after which she asked him to look at her, and Arvid said that she was his bride. The girl was madly happy that he knew her, but they were distracted from the conversation by the guards who were snooping through the forest to find Arvid. She told him that since he was seeing her for the first time, her words might seem absurd to him. However, she wanted to offer him something, namely a contract marriage. She knew what he wanted, because he wanted to destroy the divine gifts, and she couldn't explain everything, but she would be useful to him, and she could tell him where the sacred tree was. She promised him that only 1 year they will be married, 1 year and she will share all the information she knows, and begged him to take her family. However, the guy suddenly asked her to show her the flowers, and when she said for doing so, he opened his eyes, grabbing her hand and smiling happily. He also told her that he could see her, and grabbed her hand and told her to stay close to him from now on, giving her the affectionate name of Ryosi. The girl was astonished, for no one had ever addressed her so affectionately. Somehow her useless name now seemed insane. In the end, Magnus's escorts caught them after all. Now sitting in the castle, the girl was worried about whether Arvid would be all right. Magnus, who was sitting in front of them, noticed that Arvid had been very disrespectful in the strange house, because the road had been specially laid out with flower beds, and he didn't understand how he could get lost in the garden of the Elvador. He was beginning to doubt it. Of course, he realized that the boy was still at the age when people like to hide and seek. Gloriosa could sense the bloody atmosphere there, and despite his strength, Arvid was still a child, and did not know whether she should do something and intervene in the conversation. Arvid, however, looked carefully to see if there was anyone who responded to LA or S, the fox having lost its wild nature and ingratiating itself to him now. Looking at Magnus's indignation, he explained that the reason he had come to Elvador today was to find a bride, and his bride was Gloriosa sitting next to him. That was why, from now on, absolutely everyone had to treat her as a member of the Eltesia family, because he was taking the girl for himself. Gloriosa already realized that she had asked him to take her away, but she didn't know why he had done it so suddenly, because she had assumed that they should have just run away together. When Magnus said that he had not heard anything about it, Arvid was not surprised, because he thought that the head of Elvador was a young chicken who had just taken the position, and there were probably many things he did not know. Gloriosa realized that Magnus might be implying that he was going to create an ogre, and even the knights were worried, as she expected the situation to get worse. When she asked Arvid to calm down, he smiled and ordered Magnus to treat Gloriosa the same way he treats her. She is his fiancée, and the head of the family has no right to decide where she should be from now on, and asked if there was anything left that he still didn't understand using all his power. Gloriosa watched in wonder, for it was magic she had seen before, back on the day Elvidor had died. She knew that Arvid had this ability, but then a man appeared out of thin air and introduced himself, saying that his name was Helbert, who was Duke Yultesia's chief butler and had come to Elvidor at his master's call. All the guards there were surprised by this nonsense and did not understand how he was here, because the journey from Yultesia to Ecuador takes 2 months. Gloriosa realized that it was all with the help of the mystery passed down in Yultesia by ancestral magic, which was an incredible ability. Then the butler handed Magnus a document saying it was a confirmation of their mother's friendship. If you looked closely, Magnus would be convinced of the validity of his representative as the head of their family. I say finally realized that he is the representative of the head of the family. Right now in Arvid's hands the whole Yultesian family. That's why he behaves like this with Magnus, as it changes everything. She assumed that her mother had seen this coming and left the papers with Arvid. Otherwise, Magnus would have stolen them. Magnus had already read the papers and said that since they were still too young, it would be nice if they just saw each other once a year. But Arvid told them to get the papers ready because he was getting married today. When Magnus began to resent him for being against it, Arvid used his magic to tell him that he wasn't asking his permission, and he shouldn't have tried to test his nerves. So he stroked him on the back and told him that Gloriosa would be with him while the marriage papers were being prepared. It was at that moment that the girl realized that Magnus had lost, and finally she could say goodbye to that damned Elvidor. She has been waiting for this moment for an incredibly long time, and now, finally, her life will change, and the guy's confidence is slowly spreading to her as well. Now she would be able to live a new life, the life of a human, not a tree. After all, they were going to go to Yultesia, where her new home would now be. The girl still had abilities from her time as a sacred tree. She spoke 7 languages fluently and remembered perfectly how every country was born and how its history was erased. The ideas that would shake every empire in the future, and the promising talents of every family, and she even knew ways to use it all. But what Arvid was offering her now just didn't make sense, because she had no idea how it should be eaten, because if she did something wrong, it would ruin all that beautiful form. She had never eaten such beautiful food when she was born, so she pushed it away and said she couldn't eat it because she didn't know how to eat this gorgeous food. And it wasn't a cake, and it wasn't hard, and she didn't know how to eat it because it seemed to her that she could break it with a knife. But suddenly there were sounds coming from her hungry stomach, which proved that she had really become a human being, because when she was a tree, she didn't even know what hunger was. Then Arvid offered to sit close to him. He would feed her and show her how to cut it, and in return she could open her flower one more time. When she did, Arvid said that thanks to her he could see well, as her flower illuminated the space in front of her. Gloriosa was not surprised at all, because she had thought that her flowers could only harm her. But in the end, they were of no use to her. But she was glad that she could be of use to her. In Elvidor, absolutely everything that had no value was thrown away, and she wouldn't want him to abandon her. When Arvid cut off a small piece of the dessert and handed it to Gloriosa, she was delighted at how delicious it was, for she had a feeling it was made of angel wings and clouds. Despite the fact that they were still in the castle of Elvidor, but being near him, the girl felt calm and cozy, and most importantly safe. But they were distracted by the butler, who said that he had brought the documents back prepared by Elvidor, which they needed to check. The document stated that a wedding of the appropriate level between the two families would take place after reaching the age of majority. But after reaching the age of majority, if Gloriosa wished to divorce, it would be so. And also, if Gloriosa Elvidor did not become the legal mistress of the Yultesia, the marriage would be null and void. In any case, Magnus had made such terms without knowing that it was a 1-year arranged marriage, but Gloriosa didn't think her brother would let her go so easily. At that moment, she thought Arvid whispered something else to him. Did it mean there was a secret ability to strike a fatal blow? After all, she was a sacred tree. But even she didn't know about this information. She was curious. But now, anyway, everything is fine. It seems to me all that was left was to sign the contract. Gloriosa is very happy there, while I was enough that soon she and Arvid can leave Elvidor together, and she will really now go to Yultesia. When they arrived there, the girl was asleep from fatigue, and the butler was surprised that Arvid had brought her there at once. Even if she was his fiancée, it was customary to meet her once a year, and they all knew how treacherous the head of Elvidor was. He is a shameless man who aims at the operator power. He is especially loved by the regent for his handsome appearance. In addition, his abilities, due to their disgusting custom of using humans as fodder, are not in bad repute in the imperial castle. The next head of the Yultesia family will soon be determined. But who would have thought that such an important time would bring this man's younger sister into the house? So the butler wanted to ask why he had made such a successful decision. Arvid pointed to the flower and asked him to bring it to his face, and when he did, he saw that the boy could see, which the butler was madly surprised. Cursed be the whole mouth of Yultesia. This was the curse, and also the will left by the first emperor before his death. Because of this, all children born in Yultesia were cursed, and among them, Arvid Yultesia suffered especially badly. He currently has 4 curses hanging on him. Since then, he has lost his sight due to his damaged body. He vomits blood all living creatures are afraid of. And the last one is that he has been deprived of certain emotions since birth. Of course, even if he can't see anything in front of him, he can see the truth of the stars and the cosmos. And thanks to his developed senses, he can live an ordinary life using only 1 cane. But there are things in the world that are much more beautiful if you see them with your own eyes. And he will be amazed that it is finally possible for his master, because a miracle has actually happened. And if it weren't for that miracle, he'd suspect that bringing this child close to him was Magnus's plan. But for some reason, the flowers of Gloriosa give him sight, and miracles can't be controlled. So he had no choice but to believe, and now he could only see what was near the flower, but still he could see something. Arvid asked Helbert to see to it that all the conditions necessary for his wife's comfortable life were met, and for the powers of these flowers, he must pay the appropriate price. And he must also be careful that no one treats Ryosa as a spy because he trusts her. If they don't want to challenge him, they will have to trust her as well. The butler listened to him carefully and bowed, promising to remember his words and suggesting that perhaps the previous head of the family had known this would happen. It was possible that her mother had suggested it to Arvid's mother, but on the other hand, it was questionable why she would choose to give away her most beloved daughter to a man with so many curses. Whatever the reason, Arvid wasn't going to let this child go, and to him, it was surprising since she wasn't even afraid of him and was incredibly special. It had been so long since he had last seen a smile on the young lord's face, and this rare ability to blossom could bring about a change in Yultesia. Arvid wondered how much sleep his wife was getting, and it would probably be better to do as Helbert had said, which was to take her to her bedroom. It was a wonder he'd brought his fiancée from where he'd come to break the engagement, but he realized that when she was asleep, she was completely different from what she had been before. She was trembling with fear, but there was determination in her voice, and a golden light lingered on all sides. And her eyes like Venus, and her eyelashes like the Milky Way. Her face he saw first since she was born, because he wanted her to wake up and show him her eyes again. Sometimes she looked insanely happy, and for him those moments were special. But then Lem Yultesia, the current head of the family who thought that Arvid's role was always to look long-suffering, entered the room. He wondered why he shouldn't make his expression softer, because if anyone saw him, they might think he had the plague. Lem wondered if they had a guest bedroom, but Arvid said he would let her stay in his room for now, since the child was his person. But he shouldn't have behaved that way with Lem, for he had even come to see the child who might be the next head of the family. He wondered if it was likely that she would be the next head of 8 years old. Given her fragile constitution, she should be handled with care. So Lem decided to treat her like a daughter-in-law. Let it be time, yes, but he can't tell a boy what to do even though he's his father. He realized that Gloriosa Elvidor had shown her hidden claws. To follow the news to each family, he sent his subordinates, and never thought he would hear such an interesting story. One day, she suddenly recruited all the maids and forced them to spill soup on the first mistress's son. She also revealed the secret of the child. Perhaps she is just the right person for this snake's den, and things are getting very interesting. Since she's his daughter-in-law, he should treat her well. He should take care of her. When Gloriosa woke up in the morning, she couldn't understand what was going on, and couldn't open her eyes because she was afraid that her departure from Elvidor might be just a dream. When she woke up, however, she saw Arvid sitting beside her bed and asked how long she planned to pretend to be asleep. He explained that she had to get up and have breakfast. I asked if she wanted to eat together, but as she was not feeling well, He was worried whether she would be able to walk to the dining room or whether it would be better to bring the food into the room. When the girl answered that she could walk by herself, they decided that they would call the doctor after she had eaten because they needed him to see her. Gloriosa thanked him for taking care of her, but it was a matter of course. Now, when she woke up, he would introduce her to all the maids who would serve her. They would make sure Gloriosa was comfortable, and now he left so she would not be rushed while she was getting ready. She was approached by the maids. There were 4: Linda, Annie, Phoebe, and Brill. They informed her that today they would be serving her, and they were honored to meet the little lady. Gloriosa was really grateful, but didn't know if she needed so many people. The Huang's peculiarity is that the members of this family are clean, fragrant, and even without taking a bath. When they surrounded her trying to dress her, the girl explained that she was not little and would soon be 14. Even though everyone else thought she was 9, she had an insanely small body. Gloriosa was surprised that they had gotten her age so wrong, even though she grew up in a family where she couldn't eat properly, so her growth was very slow. When she was dressed, the girl realized that these were new clothes, as if specially prepared for her. She should go and get them to thank them. It was the first day in a new place, the first day of a new life she had dreamed of, and an opportunity she had caught with her own hands. They would never let her go, because she really didn't want to suffer anymore. That was the thought on her mind as she went to breakfast. When she finally reached the dining room, she didn't understand why the atmosphere there was so ominous, threatening and tense and not very comfortable. A few hours ago, the maids were preparing for breakfast and discussing the fact that Mr. Arvid's fiancée had arrived. They didn't know why so suddenly, for what kind of woman she must be for this terrifying man to marry her in one day. Knowing what kind of character their temporary head of the family had, they even speculated that it might have been a kidnapping, or she might be as terrifying as Mr. Arvid. Presently, the maids stood by and were afraid to look at her, and so they told her about today's menu, which included soup with braised scallops and lamb steak with potatoes. When the girl began to taste them, they all stood and prayed that she would like the food they had prepared, and sighed with relief when she liked it all. Looking at the girl, they suggested that maybe she wasn't so scary and terrifying yet, and moreover, Mr. Arvid was getting softer with her. They were very happy to see her, and hoped that she would stay here and become their mistress. She would definitely re-educate Mr. Arvid, and life would change. Gloriosa tasted very good, though she was bothered by the intense stares, but she mustn't overdo it. She was eating fatty food after she had been starving for a long time. She could get sick anyway, but so far she was fine, and it must be because she had worked hard to get here and had to pay for such good food. So she decided to ask him what she could do for him now, something that would help her, and the boy replied that what we should do now was to restore her health. Arvid had to work because it was time to do the paperwork, when she said she wanted to see it too. He knew she would be bored, but if she wanted it so badly, why not? He asked Helbert to make room for Ryosi in the room where they were going, and she offered to hold hands with him. But she realized that she had said something wrong, because this was Arvid's house, and it couldn't be uncomfortable. Moreover, how could she help when she didn't know the internal layout? So she explained that she just wanted to do something useful, because it seemed to her that he was uncomfortable walking with that cane. But to her surprise, the boy smiled and took her hand for her help, as he appreciated it, and offered to take a walk in the garden while Helbert prepared a place for her. Arvid, despite the fact that he could laugh at her in this situation, took her hand. He is also very kind. After that, her boyfriend took her to the garden, saying that it wasn't comparable to the garden in the east, but he hoped she would like it, and he would be glad if she did. However, expecting to see something beautiful, Gloriosa was wildly disappointed when she saw that it was completely ruined, and everything there was terribly neglected. Arvid said that there was talk of it being even better at night. Although he had never been there at that time, I realized that apparently they didn't mean that at all. He certainly didn't know anything about the garden because you can't plant flowers in it, and she looked around wondering why it had gotten so ruined. Then she smelled a strange smell, brackish and a little fishy, realizing that it was the smell of the sea, and perhaps they had watered the plants with water from the sea. Arvid said that she could look around in peace because this was her home now, and the girl realized that and asked if she could take care of the garden for a while. The boy answered that if her body was fully recovered, then she could do whatever she wanted, so she could not worry and cry because no one would see it here. The girl cried and realized that Arvid had spoiled her with his kindness, and that was why she was crying. But he told her that he would like them to smile only from now on. These were words that would be remembered for a long time, because in this place, she wanted to regrow both the garden and her life. After that, they went to Arvid's office, and the girl wondered how much she had cried, for she could not even open her eyes properly. She had no idea that they would prepare such a beautiful place for her, and did not know if she would be a nuisance, for perhaps they had overdone the decorations with flowers, a cushion, and a dessert. Arvid asked her if she didn't like the dessert, because she hadn't eaten anything, but she explained that since it was his office, she thought she was in the way. But the boy said that it wasn't so, because someday the office would be hers. She would be able to look through all the documents, and he would tell her to bring the documents with regular letters, in addition to the documents with the alphabet for the blind. Gloriosa was surprised, because if he said it would be her office, then she would have to stay here for a long time. So Arvid asked the butler to bring all the documents in 2 types. Helbert said that while they were eating, the news from the regent had arrived, and the imperial family hoped that they would share the news with them and congratulated him on such a momentous occasion as the wedding. The order came to come to the palace and greet them all. It was said that if he did not come, it would be possible from now on not to attend the celebration of the Day of Conquest 3 times, and it was not discussed. On Conquest Day, the head of the duchy and the heir of each family must come to the imperial palace once a year, swear allegiance, and bend the knee to the emperor. After the Day of Conquest, her father, out of his many wives, always went to her mother. That was how she remembered it. At this point in time, the Empire of Galaxios is ruled by a young emperor. However, he cannot wield power as he pleases. In fact, the power is held in his hands by the emperor's regentess. What is notable is that the regency and the former empress were sisters. The former emperor married all the sisters from the same family, and Magnus and the regency are lovers. Magnulus will commit atrocity relying on power, and this must definitely be stopped, as the privatization of the public roads of the Inland Empire, xenophobia, exploitation of orphan labor under the guise of charity. And also the next problem is the autonomous region of Hooks. The oasis has dried up, and they can't figure out the reason for it for the 3rd month. After all, if Hooks can't function, transportation will stop running in the desert. When Ryosa asked, Arvid told her that a piece of wood and an inscription in an ancient language were all the clues they had. After thinking about it, the girl realized that she knew that this event was one of Magnus's evil plan for drought and flooding. Hux is an autonomous region in the desert, located in the southern part of the empire in close proximity to the lands of Yoltesia, but have no owner. The locals retain the religion and lifestyle peculiar only to this place. They are quite self-confident in their mentality, so they tried to solve the problem themselves. However, they did not succeed, so they informed the girl, and the girl explained that the reason why the oasis had withered was simple. It was because of the unforgettable. So she told them to hire a detective to find out a couple of things, and to find out if there was a nezabudka growing near the oasis, because if so, there was a man with a description of it. Then Arvid took this document and handed it to Helbert. On it was written the name Crocel Elvador, who was 22 years old. The flower Unforgotten possesses water absorption abilities, shiny blue hair like sea waves, pale skin, a drooping chick covering his eye on one side is Magnus's crony. The flower man with the strongest water ability is probably lost somewhere in the village, but they need to move as carefully as possible because he is a very dangerous type, and you can't predict what he will come up with. It is true that flower growers have unique abilities, and the abilities of such a famous man Magnus are known to everyone. But the abilities of other florists are shrouded in secrecy, and Gloriosa gave away such a valuable secret for free. She explains that the man has an aversion to humans and no moral values. Even so, he has extraordinary strength, so Magnus likes to work with him. Using him, Magnus prepares his plan called Drought and Flood. And the first point of the plan is an oasis in the village, and the water soaked in that place will flow into another area, and the plots will be badly affected. In every area, droughts, floods rise. With this statement, he is going to overtake the empire in a bad harvest year and raise the price of exporting food from Elvador. There is a reason Magnus is targeting. Arvid understood without words what she meant. It is an autonomous power because Magnus Methil owns a neutral land, even if there is a famine. They will not be able to get support and protection from the duchy. And also, they will not be able to buy expensive food, which will be a huge percentage. Since they have a tendency to be autonomous, they will let it be known late. Arvid thanked her sincerely for all the information she had given, but when he approached the girl, he felt that she had fever and explained that he could not leave his body without attention. Then, apologizing, he realized that he should have guessed it earlier and sent Helbert to gather the doctor and promised that he would be sure to grab Crossel for them to disappoint her. Gloriosa realized that if she owned Crossel now, she would be able to stop the whole plan to drought flood. There would be no more second chances. Hopefully, everything would be all right if the rest was trusted a sight. When the girl was put to bed, Helbert was surprised at how amazing she was and how much information she knew. And also the fact that she is able to assess and relate every event based on the situation and does not look her age at all. Suddenly, Arvid started coughing and saw the blood, realizing that time was getting shorter and shorter and he might have to pass the seal faster than he thought. But he was sure that Gloriosa would be able to handle it, a system that only existed in the Jultessian family, making the woman the head of the family. Since ancient times, only one son has been born in a Jultessian family. The son who bears the curse from birth has been denied the right to inherit in place of the head of the house. Everyone in the family will be cursed, so Jultessia has found a way to marry a bride who will be his partner from an early age, must live in the duchy, and take Lessen's successor. There are two candidates, the first chosen by the Jultessian family and the second by the imperial family. For these candidates, the family prepares several tasks and carries them to the temple. The guardian spirit of the Jultessiah chooses the tests himself, so after all the tests, the guardian spirit chooses one girl. As proof that she has become the head of the family, gives her a tiara. The stone inserted on the tiara reacts only to the mistress, and the color changes depending on who wears it. The girl chosen in this way will carry the power and responsibility on her shoulders. Under normal circumstances, his mother would have been responsible for choosing the candidate, and the girl could learn a great deal from her. Just then, Arvid received a message from his father, informing him that he had found the egg-laying sea queen. She had laid the coveted eggs deep under the water. Of course, she is in her egg-laying season, so she is very sensitive. It will take some time for him to return, so he asked for 10 days. Neptune's egg. This is one of the top 3 delicacies in the world. The queen of the sea is very fierce during the egg-laying period. Due to the difficulty of extraction, the eggs are sold for gold by the weight of an even egg. It had been a long time since his father had done anything useful. He realized he would need to send some to the regent. Just then, a guy named Kalin appeared and began to report on the current situation in Elvador. Explained that although there was a fire, there was no damage. However, since there are so many wooden buildings in the east, quite a few storage barns were lost. After listening, Arvid realized that, as I expected from Riosa's fire flower, even though everything was burning so brightly, its power wasn't able to burn or hurt anything, and no one was hurt. But he was different, therefore ordered the burning of the Elvador mansion, and felt that it wasn't enough, because, as he expected, Magnus was rather dismissive of the head. Not only had she been blamed, criticized, neglected, and treated with contempt, he now understood why she still looked like a 9-year-old child. After hearing all this, Helber got angry. He got wood, for which he apologized because it was a characteristic of minotaurs that he found it hard to contain his anger. Arvid realized he couldn't leave it at that and asked what business Magnus was working on right now, and now he was doing his best to use private property to pave the way. So Arvid realized that he couldn't leave that arrogant bastard alone even if he failed, because they didn't realize Gloriosa's value and behaved like that, and now he would have to make them pay for it. So he told everyone to go to the scene and kill absolutely everyone with the surname Elvador in order to pay for everything that was going on. They also needed to keep it all a secret from Gloriosa, because she wouldn't be able to handle it, and it might seem quite cruel. So the butler asked if he could talk to her about something else, because Mrs. Gloriosa was not the only candidate, and her rival was none other than the niece of the regent Ayur Wick. When Gloriosa woke up in the morning, she didn't understand when she had fallen asleep, because, as Arvid said, she was examined by a doctor and then watched him working for a while and apparently fell asleep there. And she also remembered that when she didn't fall asleep, Arvid said something very nice. I couldn't understand if it was a dream, for she was already half asleep, but felt alert thanks to a good sleep. She realized that just as long as no one was interfering with her quietly, she had to quickly plan further actions and make a plan to destroy Magnus. At the moment, Magnus's main activity is to privatize the public roads. Once the road construction is completed, she will use her power to block the roads, thus forcing him to use only his roads. Besides, the public roads are also the regent's target, because her target has the ability to go to death at any time to each of the 7 to carry out military policy. The plan for dealing with the drought and floods is to raise funds to build this public road. Of course, if Crocelle is captured, it could prevent both. But Gloriosa realized that capturing Crocelle would be like touching the regent, and one must be sure to tell of this and other events. For the regent's first charity to change her image, she would build an orphanage in Elvador to be run by Magnus, but it was nothing more than a ruse to use child labor in the granaries. Finally, the enslavement of other races, elves sold simply as decoration minotaurs used as gladiators, and Magnus was complicit in all of these acts. Yes, maybe that's why Gloriosa went back in time, and so from now on, she has only one thing to remember, and that is to take revenge and completely destroy Magnus and stop his atrocities. And if she can do that, she will try to break the curse. To do that, she must at least be the head of the family. She was distracted from her thoughts by the maids, who were surprised that she had just woken up and was already doing something. Then, they said that it was time for her to get dressed at last, for they had prepared several dresses and jewelry for her hair. But nevertheless, every time they did it, they looked very happy. Then they suggested that she look around the mansion before breakfast, for in fact, the girl would like to go to the library and the maid was happy to accompany her. They walked along the corridors, and she told them that this was the main house they were in. They were far away from here. There were detached houses. Behind the mansion, there was a desert, so she should not go out alone as it was dangerous. On the other side, there is a sea with a cliff, so she also had to be careful. And the sea and desert in the same place is really a strange place. Then the maid, noticing that the weather was quite sunny today, suggested that she run in the garden after going to the library, to which Gloriosa was very surprised because she had never run in the garden before. She realized that with her stamina, she would rather be found dead with a broken nose in the garden, so she decided against it. The maid went on to say that there were usually 2 candidates for the place of head of the family, but they were all on Lady Gloriosa's side. After all, when the lady was with Arvid, he became really soft and kind, and they thought that she was the only one who could do it, so she hoped that she would become the head and everything would continue in the same way. Anyway, the girl was very pleased to hear that. She was a bit depressed that an ugly girl like her had to compete with Ayur, and she was a member of the imperial family, and it was only fair that she should have at least that advantage. Suddenly, Lem came up behind her and picked her up in his arms. When the maid started to resent that she shouldn't have done that, he was upset that he couldn't even give her a proper hug. Gloriosa looked at him with all her eyes, for she had just realized that it was Arvid's father, and he resented her for not eating anything, for she was as light as a feather. When they had breakfast, Lem apologized, for he was not accustomed to Oriental etiquette, and when the girl said that it was rather difficult to meet such a lady as she was, he laughed, for in his opinion she looked more like a child who was about to become fat. The girl looked at him and said that she was already 13, so she could be considered a lady, and looked at the table in front of her, which was filled with food, with horror. Lem explained that she had to eat everything on the table, and if she did, he would recognize her as a lady. He really liked it when she ate well. Since she was going to live in his house and even claimed to be the head of the family, he had no choice but to feed her well. Gloriosa looked at him and realized that she had almost fainted from shock earlier, but he didn't seem as bad as she had expected, so she asked him why he thought she would be the head of the family. He was surprised because he had heard that she was from the East, but she was well versed in the affairs of Yultesia, and it was quite a hot issue. But above all, because his rascal son was very fond of her. He had never before seen the scoundrel do anything for others, and Gloriosa was surprised. But it was the same as when the first person you see in your life is your mother. Naturally, it is something special. The first person he saw in his life, for Arvid it was her, and she should not be happy about it. But she was happy. Besides, Arvid has no intention of choosing the candidate the regent suggests, so it's pretty clear who will be the head. Gloriosa didn't understand if it could be her. After all, she was a bad child who was happy to hear that, and instead of sympathizing with Arvid's pain, she first felt worried, and maybe there was something wrong with her. Lem, on the other hand, replied that there is no such thing as a bad child in the world, also with her. In addition, The test evaluates the ability to make decisions to get out of a crisis when on the verge, and in this regard he thought that she would do a great job, because he was sure that the guardian would choose her someday. It would be her virtue. Thinking about it, the girl compared that she would not be like a sacred tree and not a scapegoat. Then the girl inquired if anyone tended the garden and learned that Helbert was in charge of it, and he was Butler's assistant as well as gardener in one person. After all, she had spoken to Arvid about it once and would like to take over the care of the garden. However, they were distracted from their conversation by Arvid entering the room and hearing the last part of their conversation. Lem, however, asked Arvid not to be upset that she had told him about it, and he knew that inside he was blazing and pretending to be cold-blooded. After Lem decided to leave, Arvid wondered if her father had bothered her in any way, and was glad that all he had done was feed her a nice meal. About what she had said last time, that she wanted to tend the garden, and the view was fine with her. The front was all hers, but she would only be able to do it once she was fully recovered. Gloriosa tried to insist, for she was sure that she was already well. The doctor had a different opinion, however. She needed to eat more and gain weight in order to become strong, and though Arvid was always grumbling, she felt that he said this because he cared about her. He also said that as long as she was healthy, there was nothing she couldn't do here, and the girl was happy to realize that he was right, and she needed to get well soon so she could do absolutely anything. A few days later, she met with Lem again, and with each of their meetings he appeared stranger to her. This time, however, he offered to show her one very good comma place, and the girl didn't know it would be rude not to say something about being nervous. But the man led her to an orchard, standing near which she watched with delight, for there was such a place in Yultesia too. She could even feel the love of the trees, and they looked awfully happy. Lem told her that the orchard looked the same now, but that it would be different here, because it had been remodeled, and looking at the sign, she read that it said, Gloriosa Orchard. She realized that this orchard was made especially for her, and Lem had explained that every child should have a secret place, and she had never received a better gift than this. When Gloriosa thanked him, Lem said that Arvid had ordered it, because he had once heard about it from Helbert, and she had loved it so much that she was glad she had come to Yultesia. Lem explained that the place is usually called the Land of Snakes. It's kind of a nickname just like Magnus is called a fox. The family of Yultesia are called snakes. The girl was surprised why snakes, because snakes are usually used for evil purposes, but Arvid and her father were very kind to her, and even the trees here greeted her madly affectionately. Lem looked at her happy look and said that this was not all, and he had to repay her for her faith, so he had to show her one more place where they were going. No matter what anyone said, Gloriosa believed only in what she had seen and experienced, and Arvid and his father, whom she had met in person, were very friendly and warm people. They came to a small hut, and Lem said that it also belonged to her, because he built it himself. She could decorate and play here as she wanted. The girl already loved this place. Everyone was so nice. He said that he had to leave and wished her a good time, and for some reason Gloriosa seemed a little closer to her father today, but she didn't know if it was normal to think that there was a little room for her in the Yultesia. The same day she was seen by the doctor, he reported that she was much better than when she was first seen. But in order to work in the garden, she would have to wait 2 more weeks and gave her today's dose of medicine which she had to take. The girl didn't like it at all. It was bitter and tasteless. She would never have taken it in her mouth if she didn't have to. But afterwards, Arvid gave her a candy to make it less bitter. As the doctor left, he added that it would be very helpful for her to get out for a short walk in the fresh air every now and then, whereupon Arvid suggested that she go out and walk around a bit. Gloriosa was a little surprised, for she looked out of the window and saw that it was raining. But Arvid explained that people like that had a certain atmosphere, and there was one place he wanted to show her. She was delighted, so she accidentally hiccuped, because it had been a long time since she had last spent time with Arvid, which he smiled at and took her hand, and they went there. She was a little embarrassed, but not that she didn't like it. Arvid didn't realize how excited she was about how much she liked him, and when the maids brought her a raincoat and an umbrella, she was ready for an evening walk in the rain. And before they set off on their walk, Arvid had news for her. He told her that he had found the Crocel-Elvador trail. Even though he hasn't been caught yet, he will be, for Cullen knows his business. His subordinates are currently tracking the crosser in the Hucks, and he's doing a lot for Arvid. When Gloriosa heard this, it was like a weight lifted off her shoulders because she was so worried about the issue. As they walked under the same umbrella, Arvid pulled her very close to him so she wouldn't get wet. He said he hoped she would like the coast near the house, and since it was not raining so hard there should be no problem, for there was a scenery that could only be seen at such a time. When she looked up, she was surprised, and he explained that they called it the dragon's nest, for he said that the dragon was preparing to go up into the sky and should have been careful, for it was easy to fall down there. She thought it would be good if they could see the landscape together, and wondered if there was anything she could do to make it happen, for she had secretly trained herself to nurture the flower, and now she could easily grow 2 buds. Of course, what she was going to do now was much bigger. For some reason, she was now confident that she could do it, and she used her power to cover the entire dragon's nest with flowers for Arvid to see. She wanted to show the scenery that was in front of her. It was her only desire. She put her whole soul into it. It was a level far from the 2 buds she nurtures at night, an abnormal increase in level. After that, Arvid was doing his paperwork and remembered their conversation, realizing that for the first time in his life, he saw the forest stretching into the trees. Then he saw the burning mansion, and this time, the swirling maelstrom. It was amazing, because Gloriosa showed him magnificent views every time, until now to find the beautiful. He had to look up at the sky, but thanks to Gloriosa he realized that there are beautiful things on Earth too. The guy knew that he had to give her a gift, so he called one of his subordinates to find out that the work of privatizing public roads was fully completed. Crossel Elvador was arrested. One day, the maids showered the girl with compliments, for she was very beautiful and looked like an angel descended from heaven, and her hair swept back looked especially good. Gloriosa realized that she had a very strong feeling for them, and it was hard for her to think that someday they would have to part, because soon another candidate for the head of the family would come, and it was possible that one of them would take her side. But they were outraged that she could even think of such a thing. They would always take care of her. They were ready to try their best to make her the official head of the family. Besides, the candidate would have her own servants with whom she would come to the capital, but they would never lose to her. The maids explained that with the arrival of Gloriosa in the mansion, as if spring has come again, and no one but her can become the head of the family. But not only Mr. Arvid and his bright look became much kinder. In addition, everyone cares for her with all sincerity as they said their mansion spring and sunshine. Well realized that everyone is afraid and their father, but the men who are seen are different from those who see the rest. However, Crossel on the case information for which she gave, therefore the host asked to escort her. The one who caught Crossel was held backwards, and he was furious asking how they had found him, but he himself supposed it was Gloriosa, resenting how she had dared to forget Mr. Magnus's favor and become a traitor. He was sure that soon Mr. Magnus would come to rescue him, and then they would all be finished. But Arvid closed his mouth because he couldn't listen to it anymore, and with the help of magic made a snake in his mouth, and then it finally became quieter, and explained that enough they were similar monsters, but their class is completely different. However, he explained that he had to thank Ryosa. He had given him a servant since he now had too formidable a look to face the girl. Crossel stared at her, not understanding how this girl, who had spent her life in oppression, thought that she had made the right decision by giving her lord, knowing that Magnus was feeding her to the ogre flower. When the girl looked at him, however, she said they should have gotten rid of him to clip Magnus's wings, for Magnus was a garden scarecrow who could do nothing on his own, and to hide his ineptitude, he used and deceived people. And Crossel was so foolishly caught that he was useless, and they all knew what Magnus did to useless people. She realized that Crossel was in big trouble, because even villains have the most sincere admirers. Crossel always wanted to prove his usefulness, so for the first time, Magnus gave him a huge role. That was his weak spot. And she didn't just use the word useful because she was like a red rag to a bull for Crossel. So she said thank you to Crossel that he was very useful to her, because thanks to him it was possible to hide the truth of his own information. From now on, she was going to push harder and harder on Magnus's throat, bringing him out into the open. Then it will be love in the dough and become their head of the family. Suddenly, Crossel used his power to raise huge waves of water which he directed at Gloriosa, screaming for her to die, but was surprised when the girl used her power to build a wall of flowers that protected her. Gloriosa dared to admit that she intended to put herself in such a situation. After all, her mother said that born to Elvador, the more they hurt, the stronger they become. She didn't want to settle for just a few blossomed inside her, the ancient power she took when she was a sacred tree. This power can control all the plants in the world. Vid opens a space. He is probably trying to help her, but they must suffer because she has put a barrier on him and is grateful to him for trying to help her, but not yet time. However, at one point, Crossel used his power to raise a huge wave that was taller than her flower wall, and he had the power to spout water in such volumes. But she hoped he would never be able to handle her flower, and at the same moment, a huge tree grew right in front of him, and he was perplexed. It turned out that the tree absorbed absolutely all the spillage and water, and then Arvid carried Gloriosa in his arms, who was unconscious, realizing that if the space had opened a little later, there would have been a great disaster, as to move all these trees at the same time takes a lot of time. When she woke up, she heard him perfectly well, but she did not even have the strength to speak. After all, something inside her opened, and the only word she could say was sorry, after which she lost consciousness again. However, at some point, when she opened her eyes, she noticed that she was in the forest, but only with time I realized that it is an unusual forest, and her inner world, and the place where the sacred tree connects with her essence, because the sacred tree of Elvador is a condensation of nature, and she tried for a long time not to be absorbed by this huge fauna. And it was for this reason that the sacred tree became her, and she became the sacred tree. But what happens if her flower grows right now? And looking around, she noticed that the vast field in this space was filled with her flowers. Now she could say with certainty this place was now in her possession. The power of the sacred tree and the power of the tribal wars had become hers completely. If she used this power, she could become the head of the family. But immediately she heard a voice calling her. She opened her eyes and saw Arvid standing in front of her. He decided to ask her why she had done something so reckless in the situation with Crossel, why she had pushed him and stepped forward. The girl explained that it was all to save him, because as a spellcaster she was hurt by the flower, so she couldn't get into the protective barrier he was in. If she had gotten in, she would have been burned, so she decided to protect him. And she added that she believed at the time that he would definitely save her. I think that's a pretty good excuse. But even so, Arvid realized that she was hiding something from him, and explained that right now the constellation Libra was shining in the sky, which symbolizes the truth. This means that she is still hiding something, and since the Scorpion constellation is reacting to her, she has tried to cross the line between life and death. So he asked her not to lie to him, which was Arvid's ability. To some extent she knew about it, but this was the first time she had seen it in person. Then he added that spouses should not hide anything from each other, and hoped that she would answer him. The girl was madly surprised when she heard this word from Arvid's lips. She was madly embarrassed because she said that there was more than one candidate for the search of the head of the family, and she would tell everything, even that she tried to hide so much. And that's why she wanted to develop her abilities before another candidate appeared, so that she wouldn't have to leave this place. He thought he wanted to take care of her as the head of the family, and if something happened to her, he wouldn't be able to bear it. But before he could say anything, the girl threw herself into his arms. She began to apologize and promised that she would never do anything like that again, so that he would not worry, and there would be no more similar situations in which she would be in danger. Magnus was furious and smashed everything that came under his hand, because he was outraged at how Jultessia dared to destroy his business and his business. He had lost contact with all the known people involved in the construction site. He didn't even know where Crossel was, who had gone to the Hooks area, and hers was the only one who could go to such a step. But it wasn't easy to find out what was going on. He realized that Gloriosa was involved. But it was quite funny, for he thought that this girl was a free fool, and there could be no other. After all, it had already made her that way. She had always been like a doll who wouldn't dare resist or rebel at us. Sometimes she had begun to deceive him. He couldn't believe that this silly girl was playing Magnus Elvador with him. When one of his subordinates named Elid asked him to calm down, he didn't see how he could. After all, Gloriosa had sided with Arvid, and they had outmaneuvered him. And most of all, he was annoyed that this brat of a Jultessian who knew his secret. But Elid reassured him by saying that if he did not want to reveal the secret now, he should have stopped. For Regent Octavia had summoned him to her and wanted to see him right away. And Magnus instantly ordered a carriage to be prepared for him and set off. He rode and realized that this was not how he should be. He needed the regent to need him even more. He should look more beautiful and seductive. He could avoid and replace that prediction. It was that even as a child, he had been told that he would be ugly dried up by someone he himself was a parasite, and what he desired would never fall into his hands. He would not be able to swallow even those close to his color, and glory would only lie to the one who gave it its name. Steal the flame can only be stolen by soft words and attitudes, and now he understood that it was all those words carried in Gloriosa that he should have killed even earlier. To prove that the prophecy was wrong, he had made the mistake of trying to make sure that this girl's colors were useless. However, they could hold back and wanted to kill her right now, catch her and tear her to pieces. However, since they would be soon, he should have watched his manners, as Ella reminded him. Ella, explaining that especially he should never show that angry look on his face, that he still had some goats up his sleeve, and for that, he should keep listening to the regent's words. Finally reaching and getting out of the carriage, he went to the regent of the Central Imperial House of Galactius Octavia and told her that he couldn't believe that she wanted to see him at such a difficult time, then he was insanely different. And also told her that he cried because he missed her. Magnus realized that no matter how you look at it, but the empire was in the hands of Octavia. Only with sweet speeches and good attitude he can steal the flame. Only with this saying he can cancel the prophecy. He wanted to be Octavia's husband. He needs to get permission to use the ring. When the girl finally recovered, she could tend the garden as she pleased. However, Helbert asked just to give him instructions he would surely fulfill everything. He explained that although he was now in a bad condition, one touch which his ancestors had tended was his splendid and beautiful, and he could resume it all. Gloriosa asked what had happened to the garden that it was in such a depressed state. Helbert explained that the plants had begun to die after the death of the previous owner, and the previous owner had been Mother Avrida. He would try to save the garden, but no matter how much he took care of the flowers, it was all useless. As the plants themselves rejected water and nutrients, I already understood for what reasons, because he could save it by renewing it and making it beautiful again. All the plants were weak and drooping, all the trees were withered, and the bushes were not bearing fruit. She would have preferred to pull them out and grow a new one, but she decided to create a new garden that would match the Jultesse, and to begin with, she thought it was a mess. But that was just her arrogance. It's okay if the trees aren't as beautiful as the others. It's okay to grow next to flowers. They all must have loved their past mistress. They were sad and missed her. After she left, it must have been after that they didn't want to bloom and decorate the garden anymore. But she stayed by them and asked them not to wither, and wanted them to beautify the place again so that they would appear again in the form in which their mistress had loved them.